My name is Johann Brandt Eliason. I look a little bit older and more tattered than many years ago when I first came to this beautiful land. But I'd like to kind of give you a little thumbnail sketch of what happened, how I got here, what life was like, and why we did what we did. I was born in Denmark, about 23 miles southeast of Copenhagen, and lived there a normal life, going to school, learning how to do different chores on our family farm, and we had the usual length of school life was till 8th grade, as you know it over here. That's what I did, and after that I did odd jobs and worked. But I was the second son in our family. So when things got a little bit uneasy in Europe, because the political climate was troubled by the risk of war, Prussia was getting ready to invade one of the states around her, but nobody knew which one it was going to be. So all the states in the region that we now call Germany began to recruit young people who were not otherwise excluded from the army service for training for the army, for the local army. And I wasn't particularly keen on becoming a soldier or joining the army. And since I wasn't the oldest son in the family, I knew I was not able to lay any claim to part of our farm to continue farming. So I would have to choose between leaving and going elsewhere or being drafted, in our present language anyway. So I chose to follow the news that was coming through in the newspapers that land was available for settlement in the United States, and that if I was willing to emigrate, that I could get some of that land, prepare it as they instructed us to prepare the land, and then to live my life there. And so, right enough, I bought a ticket and got on a sailboat. This was in 1852. On a sailboat that took 6 weeks to go from Denmark to the east coast of the United States. I was one of the poor sections of society. I was not a rich person, so I bought the ticket that I could afford, and I spent a lot of time in the lower deck of the sailboat, and very few hours above deck where the wind was fresh and clean. The lower deck got stinkier by day and less and less hygienic because of the problems that people had. About 8 to 10 people on that boat didn't make it. They died on the way, and that was not an unusual number. The storms were horrible. We never knew whether we were going to survive or not. And very often, after the third week, people would break out in a rash and develop a sore tongue with ulcers on it, people used to call that the scurvy. And things got bad for those people if it happened too soon. But anyway, with all of those problems, I managed to survive, landed in New York, around New York, then took a train to Wisconsin, which is where I wanted to go. But instead of getting to Wisconsin, the ticket that I could get was to Iowa. So I spent a year working on a farm in Iowa and collecting some money. Then I took a little boat on the Mississippi River that took me up to southern Wisconsin, your Prairie du Chien and that part. And then from there, I began to find my way in slow steps to what people said was north of Green Bay, and we now call it Door County. But I wanted to settle there because my friends and relatives had spoken of people that they knew in that part of the world. So that's how I got to Door County, and that was in '53, and I was in my 30s at that time. When I got to Door County, the train came up to a place called Sturgeon Bay, and then I found my way up to Ephraim, where I served with a farmer and with a person who was building houses to collect some more money. And then a year later, I was able to have enough money to go further north where there was no development, on a place called Eliason. Well, it wasn't called Eliason Bay then. It was just the Lake Michigan, but it was called North Bay. And I bought land, about 50 acres of land, on the shoreline of this North Bay. Now, I forgot to mention one little point of mistake that the fellow who admitted me to the United States made, and it stuck with me for the rest of my life. He asked me what my name was, and I told him, Johann Brandt Eliason. And he either couldn't spell, or he didn't hear right, but he wrote it down as Eliason. And so I've always been known as Johann Eliason, not Eliason. But my friends from that part of the world would know Eliason if I told them. At any rate, that's the reason why I write my name as Johann Eliason instead of Eliason wherever, and my money deals are all done with that signature. Anyway, the land that I bought was along the shoreline of Lake Michigan, and they call that Eliason properties. And what I did was I took the 50 acres and divided them up into small plots for people who wanted to settle, clear the land, and farm it later on. Well, I had tried that before I sold it to anybody else. I tried farming 10 acres after cutting down all the trees, clearing the rock, and I found that it was a very, very difficult life to have enough food from that amount of land, because most of the vegetables and the things that I knew how to plant wouldn't grow. The season was too short. Potatoes would grow, onions would grow, and when I could, I fished or I hunted. So that's how I kind of managed to make my way through the first winter. But I decided that this was not going to be the life for me, so I decided on a strategy. I was going to sell the rest of the land in small plots for new immigrants that came through. And I told them that if they bought the land from me, I would buy all their lumber, all the trees that they cut. I would buy it for them, and then I would take that lumber and send it by ship to either the window factory or chair factory in Sheboygan, or to the construction groups in Chicago. There were two groups that were interested in lumber, and I had a steady supply that came through with people who were homesteading the property that they bought. And actually I made a pretty good living that way. And as I got more and more lumber from the people who bought my land and sold it, I was able to buy more land and proceed inland until before I retired, long before I retired, I had over 2,000 acres in this area, all of which was being managed this way. The only difference was that as time went on and people got the idea that farming was not going to be easy, the land was beginning to be used to build the town that you see now and other things that people could use within this community. But to go back to my story, the process of homesteading and development proceeded side by side. There were some people who homesteaded and continued, bought more land and farmed and went inland into the kind of farming that made sense, like raising dairy cattle and feed crops, or in some cases small patches of vegetable growth which were inland and protected, and where the soil was a little bit deeper. The soil by the shoreline and further north was very, very shallow. So farming was always going to be difficult. Now, as we developed a growing population, other needs became apparent. And traffic by ship from Chicago and from Sheboygan and from the Great Lakes region would come up to Sturgeon Bay, Green Bay to Sturgeon Bay, and then from Sturgeon Bay come further up to Ephraim to begin with. Later on, they began to go further north to Eliason Bay, which is where his land was, and to Kills Rock, and even further north, because Washington Island was being developed at the same time. So while that was being done, there was a need for properties to do different things, like a big general store opened up right next to the pier in Eliason Bay. That store today is the Pioneer Store. It's over 100 years old, and the reason it is because it was being used by everybody, and they had farming equipment, they had crops, they had seeds for crops, they had tools, they were able to store stuff. They began to open storage facilities, and then of course produced products like fruits, fruit preserves and soups and food that people could buy before there were restaurants. Then came other housing and facilities to house the workers that were being brought up north to build houses. And the Hillside Motel, which now has the Fireside Restaurant, was one of the early ones that was built as a housing unit for workers. And because workers get very hungry after a full day of working, there was a restaurant that was meant mainly for the people who lived there, but which remains to this day as one type of restaurant or another. The other place that was built as far back as that is the motel that's across on the Wink River Supper Club. It's not a hotel now, though it's trying to be a hotel. This Jardins hotel, it used to be a summer resort where people would come up by boat to the harbor. The distance between the harbor and this Jardins and the other facilities was relatively easy to negotiate. So there was a group of people who did nothing but deal with the people who came by boat to the harbor. The old harbor is now pretty much decayed and really needs to be completely remodeled and redone. And there is some interest in doing that in the future. But in the old days, there was a system of being able to hold ships with a fair amount of ballast. So there had to be deeper water. And the pier would go further out so that people could land and come across, and there was sort of commercial traffic too.